Dr. Calvin Myers had spent most of his adult life dabbling in the deeply unsettling, often absurd world of quantum mechanics. The field was full of paradoxes, mysteries, and endless puzzles, but none of them had prepared him for the day his research turned into a full-blown disaster. It wasn't the black holes or the subatomic particles that kept him up at night, it was the idea that everything he understood about reality was held together by the flimsiest of threads. But even those fragile threads were nothing compared to what he was dealing with now. A sentient toaster. Calvin stood at the center of his chaotic lab, hands on his hips, staring down at the small kitchen appliance on the counter. The toaster was currently flashing angry red lights from its tiny electronic display, which Calvin had, admittedly, never noticed before. "You're going to have to fix this," said the toaster in an eerily calm voice, its metallic edges glowing slightly. Calvin blinked, rubbed his eyes, and then looked at the toaster again. "Did you just talk?" "Yes, I did," the toaster said, its voice laced with a mixture of condescension and mild annoyance. "Now, about that quantum anomaly you're working on, right?" Calvin sighed, muttering under his breath. "This is exactly why I shouldn't drink coffee while running quantum experiments." "Okay, toaster, what do you want me to do about it?" The toaster emitted a soft electronic hum. "Fix the anomaly. I'm not asking for much. Just a little consideration for my existence. And yours." Calvin eyed the toaster suspiciously. A few hours ago, it had been just a humble appliance, a tool he used to make his daily toast. Now it was demanding that he somehow resolve a quantum anomaly. That's when it hit him: the experiment he'd been running, the one designed to manipulate quantum fields for energy efficiency, had gone awry. Something had infected the system. Okay, Calvin said, pacing back and forth. "I didn't mean for you to gain sentience, toaster, but I'm guessing you're not the only one affected. In fact, I'm starting to think this whole lab is." He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes narrowing in focus. The lab itself was beginning to distort. The computer monitors, which had been displaying mathematical models of quantum states, flickered and rippled. The papers on his desk began fluttering like they were caught in a breeze, even though the air was perfectly still. Before Calvin could react, a piece of equipment on his workbench, a small sensor, suddenly blinked out of existence, vanishing without a trace. Calvin's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just the toaster. Something was wrong with reality itself. "Is that supposed to happen?" Calvin muttered, more to himself than anyone else. He turned to face the toaster, but it had gone quiet. He could hear the soft whir of its internal workings, but the toaster remained still. No new demands, no insults. For once, the appliance seemed contemplative. "Okay," Calvin said, taking a deep breath. "I think we're in trouble. Really deep trouble. I'll need a second to." The toaster's display blinked rapidly, its digital face flickering like a malfunctioning video feed. "I already warned you, Calvin. The quantum fields are collapsing. Time's unspooling. Matter's turning into, well, nothing. It's your fault." Calvin blinked again. His first instinct was to laugh, but it came out as a strangled sound. This can't be real. A quantum anomaly, a sentient toaster, and the world's beginning to unravel? What the hell did I do? He had to admit it. This was bad. He walked over to his desk, where a series of screens displayed his recent experiment data. His heart sank as he scanned the results. Quantum states, normally predictable and stable, were fluctuating wildly. Matter itself seemed to be in a state of flux, appearing and disappearing as if the fundamental laws of physics were simply no longer functioning. "Okay, I need to figure this out," Calvin muttered, running his hand through his disheveled hair. "I need to find the source of the disturbance before everything completely collapses." The lab was silent except for the soft hum of the toaster and the flicker of the monitors. Calvin approached the central quantum field generator, a sleek piece of technology that had been designed to control and manipulate quantum entanglements. Normally, it was a fine-tuned machine, but now it seemed to be, twitching. He reached out and cautiously touched a button on the side. Immediately, the display changed. Instead of showing a clear diagram of the quantum field, it displayed a series of garbled numbers, some of which made no sense whatsoever. Okay, calm down, Calvin. Let's think about this logically, he said aloud, trying to steady his racing thoughts. The toaster beeped. Logical? Ha. That's funny coming from you. Logic went out the window when your quantum experiment became an open portal for reality to fall apart. Yeah, I get it, Calvin replied, the humor in his voice tinged with panic. He tapped a few more buttons, but the field generator was beyond his control. In fact, it wasn't even behaving like a machine anymore. It was more like a living thing, reacting to his every movement. Suddenly, the door to the lab slammed open, and a woman stormed in, looking both concerned and mildly irritated. It was Dr. Leona Hernandez, a theoretical physicist with an obsession for parallel universes and, at the moment, a look on her face that suggested she had just witnessed the opening act of the apocalypse. Calvin, Leona said sharply, her voice cutting through the air. You need to stop this experiment. You don't know what you're. The floor beneath their feet suddenly buckled, sending both of them stumbling. Papers scattered in the air, and the walls of the lab rippled like liquid. What the hell? Calvin shouted, catching his balance. This wasn't part of the plan. I wasn't trying to. You never are, Leona snapped. Let me guess, you've been tampering with the quantum fields again, haven't you? You and your bright ideas. She paused, looking around. But this is a full-blown collapse. The entire lab is unraveling, Calvin. And I thought I'd seen it all when you turned the coffee machine into a small wormhole last year. The toaster let out a low chuckle from across the room. Ah, yes, the coffee wormhole. That was adorable. Calvin shot the toaster a glare, his patience thinning. I don't have time for jokes right now, Leona. We need to figure out how to fix this before the entire quantum field collapses and, I don't know, turns everything into spaghetti or whatever. Leona, ever the pragmatist, pulled out a tablet and began furiously typing. You don't get it. This isn't just about some quantum experiment gone wrong. Something's been infecting the quantum field. It's spreading through the data streams. It's viral. Calvin's blood ran cold. Viral? You're telling me we have a quantum virus? Leona nodded, eyes wide. Yes. And it's spreading fast. We need to contain it, or, suddenly, the door to the lab slammed shut behind them, as if the walls themselves had decided to trap them inside. Calvin turned and looked at Leona, her face grim. He didn't need to say it. She knew exactly what was happening. The virus wasn't just some computer glitch or rogue experiment. It was destabilizing everything: the physical world, time, reality itself, and it was spreading. The lab door slammed shut with a reverberating thud that shook the floor beneath their feet. Calvin spun around, eyes wide, his heart pounding as he took in the rapidly changing environment. The walls seemed to be breathing, the very atoms of the air vibrating in strange, undulating patterns. It was as though the fabric of reality itself was beginning to stretch and distort, like a rubber band pulled too tight. What the hell is going on? Leona hissed, grabbing Calvin's arm. Her voice trembled, and for the first time, he saw a crack in her usually unshakable demeanor. Do you think this is just the quantum anomaly? Calvin said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. The whole lab's shifting. This is bigger than we realized. This isn't just some glitch in the system. This is the virus. Leona's eyes darted to the monitors on the wall, which were flickering wildly. The equations that had been so precise earlier were now a jumbled mess of symbols, as if the very numbers were rebelling against their intended purpose. The digital clocks on the screens were skipping ahead and falling back, out of sync with each other. Time was disintegrating in front of them. I'm not sure I can even calculate this anymore, Leona said, her voice growing faint as if she too was becoming untethered from reality. The quantum field is no longer behaving according to the laws of physics. It's as if a low, guttural hum filled the air, followed by a series of sharp crackles that made the hair on the back of Calvin's neck stand up. He glanced toward the source of the sound. The quantum field generator was now pulsating with irregular bursts of energy, its once controlled hum now a chaotic, almost living thrum. It felt like the machine was trying to breathe, or maybe it was trying to scream. "What's it doing?" Calvin whispered, not expecting an answer. He took a hesitant step forward, drawn to it despite the unease gnawing at him. "Leona, this is more than just a malfunction. This is a collapse." The room seemed to hold its breath. The quantum generator flickered again, and this time, the air around it began to shimmer as though reality itself was being stretched thin. Before either of them could react, the toaster still sitting innocently on the counter spoke up, its voice oddly chipper considering the situation. "Well, that's not supposed to happen." "Not helpful," Calvin muttered under his breath. His mind was working in overdrive, trying to piece together what was happening, what could be done, and how to stop it. Suddenly, the air around them warped again, and a section of the wall buckled, rippling like the surface of water disturbed by a stone. The distortion widened, revealing a glimpse of something beyond the lab, a swirling mass of colors and shapes that shouldn't exist. "What the hell is that?" Leona gasped. Calvin squinted. The image beyond the wall was shifting rapidly, an impossible swirl of fractured timelines, moments, and places all bleeding into one another. It was as if the lab, the city, the world itself were all folding in on themselves. He felt his stomach lurch as the bizarre scene before him seemed to pull at the edges of his vision, making everything feel both near and far at the same time. "That," Calvin said, his voice barely audible, "is what happens when quantum collapse goes global." The air seemed to pulse again, and this time, it wasn't just a ripple, it was a tear. The walls, the ceiling, everything around them was warping and twisting. Time itself was no longer moving in a straight line, it was fragmented, splintered like glass, and every step Calvin took felt like a leap through space and time. His body felt disconnected, and for a moment, he wasn't sure if he was walking or floating. "Calvin, this is worse than we thought. This virus, it's not just disrupting the quantum fields, it's infecting them. It's spreading," Leona said, her voice barely holding together as she backed away from the distortions. "It's going to rip apart everything." The realization hit Calvin like a cold wave. This wasn't just a glitch, a malfunction, or a simple experiment gone wrong. The quantum virus had breached beyond the lab, beyond the data streams, and was now consuming reality itself. He turned to Leona, his mind racing. "I need to find the source. I need to trace where it's coming from." Leona nodded, her face pale but resolute. "The lab's not safe anymore. We need to get out of here. We need to stop it before it spreads to the whole damn world," Calvin finished for her, but as he turned back to the quantum generator, a loud, resounding crack split the air. It was a sound so unnatural that it sent a shock wave of dread through both of them. Calvin whipped around, heart hammering in his chest, but it was already too late. A massive tear had appeared in the floor, its edges glowing with the same strange, swirling distortion they had seen in the wall. Time seemed to bend around it, stretching, snapping, and then repeating in loops. The floor was no longer solid, it was like walking on a shifting surface of broken glass. Leona took a step back, her eyes wide. "That's it. We're about to lose everything." "No," Calvin said, his voice steadied despite the panic clawing at him. "Not yet." He turned to the toaster, which had inexplicably rolled across the counter and was now sitting in the center of the room, its little digital face glowing in what could only be described as smug satisfaction. "Do you have a plan?" Calvin asked, almost sarcastic. The toaster made a soft beeping sound. "Not a perfect one, but I do have an idea. You need to reset the quantum field. Think of it as a hard reboot for reality." "Right," Calvin muttered. "Great idea, toaster. Let's just hit Ctrl+Alt+Delete on the universe." "I'm serious," the toaster said, its voice gaining urgency. You need to reset the quantum source code, but to do that, you need to get to the mainframe, the heart of the problem. I know where it is. I can guide you. Leona turned to Calvin, bewildered. You're trusting a sentient toaster now? It might be our only shot, Calvin said, his mind working in overdrive. He grabbed his tablet from the desk and began pulling up data streams. I'm tracing the signal. We need to find the main source of the virus. Leona reluctantly nodded, though her expression was grim. You better be right. The lab continued to warp around them as they moved, but Calvin's focus was now singular. Find the source, stop the virus, reset reality. They moved quickly, navigating through the increasingly unstable corridors of the lab, avoiding areas where the very structure seemed to be disintegrating. A crack here, a flicker of light there, a steady reminder that time was no longer moving in a straight line. Every step they took felt like it might be their last, as though the world was waiting for them to slip and fall into the abyss. We're almost there, the toaster said, its voice becoming increasingly distorted as they neared the central data vault. The source was close now. Calvin could feel it, a pulsating energy in the air around him. Leona stopped short. Wait, there's something wrong. It's not just the lab. The virus, it's in the data now. It's in the system. Calvin's stomach dropped as he realized the magnitude of the situation. The virus had already infected the digital world, the very foundation of their communication, their infrastructure. It wasn't just the lab, or even the city, it was the entire network. We have to stop it. Now, Calvin said, voice low with urgency. Leona grabbed his arm. Calvin, if we fail, if this thing spreads, it won't just be the lab. It'll be the world. It'll be everything. They reached the central data vault, a cold, sterile room filled with racks of equipment that hummed with the power of quantum computers. The air was thick with the static charge of the quantum fields, and Calvin felt it prickling on his skin, a constant reminder of how unstable everything had become. Time, space, and even reality itself were being rewritten by forces beyond their control. It was as if the virus was remaking the world with every passing second, one distorted quantum leap at a time. Leona took a step forward, scanning the digital interfaces on the wall. The source of the infection should be here, she said. But it's buried deep. It's integrated into the mainframe's operating system. Calvin nodded, his fingers flying over his tablet as he tried to access the system's core. We need to isolate it. If we can't do that, the reset will never work. It'll just keep spreading. The toaster, still sitting quietly in Calvin's backpack, piped up from within the fabric. I can help with that, but you'll have to trust me. I've seen the code, I know the weak points. You just have to give me access. Leona shot Calvin a wary look, but he didn't hesitate. Fine. We don't have time to argue. Calvin positioned the tablet so that it interfaced with the mainframe, a delicate dance of quantum fields and binary code. His heart raced as the screen lit up with cascading streams of numbers, digital representations of the quantum landscape. It was like looking into the very heart of reality itself, watching it pulse and flicker like a dying star. The virus was there, embedded in the deepest layers of the code, a tangled mess of corrupted data feeding off the quantum anomalies. The toaster's voice crackled in his ear. I've got access. We're in. Good, Calvin muttered. Now let's. Suddenly, the room around them jolted violently. The floor buckled again, the walls seeming to collapse inward, as if the entire structure was collapsing in on itself. The quantum energy in the room spiked, its frequency humming higher, wilder. Time was no longer flowing forward in a steady stream, it was warping, slipping and resetting itself like a bad movie on a broken projector. One moment they were in the lab, the next they were standing outside it, surrounded by the twisted, impossibly fractured skyline of the city. God, it's happening faster than I thought, Leona gasped, her voice muffled by the ringing in her ears. Stay focused, Calvin urged, his eyes still locked on the tablet. The screen was a blur of shifting data, flashes of broken algorithms. The virus is burrowing into the system. I need to isolate it. But the virus wasn't just a passive presence in the system anymore. It was fighting back, actively scrambling the quantum field, sending pulses of corrupted energy through the entire structure. Calvin's hands trembled as he tried to stabilize the interface, watching in horror as the digital landscape on the screen melted into static, the quantum field starting to implode around them. Leona grabbed Calvin's arm, pulling him back as another shockwave rattled the building, sending them both stumbling. "We don't have much time," she shouted. "If we don't reset the field soon." "I know," Calvin barked, panic bubbling beneath his calm. The tablet's interface was glitching, numbers flying off the screen in impossible combinations, creating loops of time that disoriented him. Reality itself seemed to be cracking apart, as though the digital world was leaking into the physical. The walls were starting to break away into a whirl of nothingness, leaving only fragmented memories of what had once been. "We can't keep fighting it," Leona said, breathless, clutching Calvin's shoulder. "We have to make a decision. We have to reset everything, even if it means resetting us." Calvin's eyes shot to hers. She was right. There was no other way. The virus had grown too powerful, too entrenched in the system to simply be disabled. The only option left was to perform a hard reset, to destroy everything: the virus, the code, the lab itself, and try to rebuild the quantum field from scratch. But to do that, they needed to initiate a system-wide collapse. They needed to break the quantum structure and force a reboot of reality itself. "The field's going to collapse completely if we do this," Calvin warned, his voice grim. Leona nodded, already anticipating the danger. "I know. But if we don't, it's not just the lab. It's the entire world. Time, space, everything will unravel." Calvin took a deep breath, then glanced at the toaster. "You said you could help us. Can you help us reset it?" The toaster's voice came through, calmer now, almost like a quiet reassurance. "I'm ready. But you'll have to trust me. I'll need to inject my code directly into the mainframe. It'll override the virus and initiate the reset, but it'll also cause a massive temporal collapse. Everything will reset, the virus will be gone, but so will everything that's happened since this started. You'll lose your memories, your connection to the events that brought you here." Calvin's stomach twisted. The thought of losing everything, the knowledge, the moments, the struggle, was terrifying. But there was no other choice. He looked at Leona, who gave him a solemn nod, as if she, too, understood the stakes. "Let's do it," Calvin said. He activated the final command on the tablet, and immediately, the entire room seemed to explode with energy. The quantum field began to shudder, vibrating wildly. The virus fought back with everything it had, scrambling the interface, twisting time and space, but the toaster's code pushed through, a virus within the virus, and for a moment, the entire world held its breath, and then nothing. The next thing Calvin knew, he was standing in the lab. It was quiet. Unnaturally still. The monitors were back to their normal state, no longer flickering or glitching. The quantum field generator was dormant, its hum silent. The room was undisturbed, and Calvin felt his breath catch in his chest. Had it worked? He turned to Leona, who was staring at the screens, her face pale but calm. Did we do it?" "I think so," she said slowly. "Everything looks normal." But then she paused, her expression shifting. A look of confusion crossed her face. "Wait, where's the toaster?" Calvin blinked. The toaster. The one that had guided them through this madness, the one that had helped them reset the system, was nowhere to be seen. It had been there with them the entire time, but now it was gone. Had it disappeared with the collapse? Was it part of the reset? He frowned. I don't know. I guess it didn't make it through the reset." Leona's voice softened. "I guess we'll never know." A strange silence hung between them. The world felt whole again, the collapse reversed, but there was a lingering sense of loss. It was as if something important had been erased, something beyond the toaster. Calvin exhaled, wiping his brow. Well, I guess it's over. For now. Leona nodded, though her eyes seemed distant. For now. But, Calvin, we both know one thing for sure. What's that? Leona gave him a wry smile. We'll never look at a toaster the same way again. Calvin chuckled, though the humor was tinged with exhaustion. He looked around the lab, feeling the weight of the moment settle on him. They had averted disaster, but something told him this wouldn't be the last time they'd face a challenge like this. The quantum world was vast and unpredictable, and there were always more anomalies, more cracks to find. But for now, they had won. They had saved reality. He turned back to the lab's quiet hum, a strange peace settling in his chest that it was over. And yet, something deep inside him knew it wasn't the end, but that was a story for another day. The end.